Good morning and welcome. This is DEOL 738. This is our third case study. Let me quickly look at our schedule for the month. We've already had our face-to-face class sessions this month. Today is Saturday the 14th. Case study data gathering, you'll owe me a PowerPoint and a reflection. As always, I prefer a short and to the point reflection after we do this, because sometimes you hear things that you might not have thought of before. Next week, you're at home. Need to finish up your discussion board with AIRS, the Super Cruncher books. There's a test again.
Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just press.
Let me.
You are in the meeting now. There are 9 participants in the meeting.
Let me mute that right quick. I'll unmute it in a minute. Remember, those Salcon tests are for you wonks that want to get deep into this stuff. I appreciate that and go. I'm more interested for you as the leader of the organization, as I've told you, to be conversant in this and know when and how to use these statistical functions in quantitative, but not that you get in and do the calculus. I want you to if you have time, but I'm more interested that you do your discussion boards, which are the big idea questions. How do you apply this stuff? So this week I've got the Salcon material for you, and that's all I've got, so that you can be working on your PowerPoint reflection for the next week. Again, I like to give you some time in between these, and so in 2 weeks we'll do our last one. But you don't really have a lot else to do. For me, you need to be working on your milestones, your presentations, and so and then you'll be at home the following 2 weeks, and you will turn in your projects and your milestones. You'll have those to do. So we've got one more time online in 2 weeks, and then you'll finish up all the materials you've been working on. I hope that you have dug into Salcon at least, as exploratory level on the calculus. But if you haven't, again, that's up to you. You can go as deep as you need to go. So that's kind of where we are and what we've got left. All right, I'm going to unmute everybody.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
This is Tracy. I noticed that there's a Dropbox for our consultancy project on our board. Are we supposed to submit that to you as well, and not just Dr. Hamilton?
You can. It's not. I'd like to read it.
Okay.
But it's not part of the course grade. But yeah, I'd kind of like to see where you are.
Okay.
That's kind of the final check for me to make sure that your methodology, especially the quantitative part, is going to fly at this point.
Okay.
I'd rather now that it, than later on down the road that we've got quantitative problems. He's going to check it for the qualitative piece. I'm going to check it for the quantitative piece. Okay. Kind of there's another set of eyes on it. So that's what that is. That's a free service. It's worth what you're paying for it.
Right.
All right. DEOL 738, case gathering, data gathering case study. You had your choice of 3 different cases. And so let's look at gathering data effectively is a critical skill for organizational development practitioners. Pair up. You already had your groups. Be non-judgmental. All right. Then you had your directions, what you were to do. You had your questions, and then you had your cases. And there were 3 of those that you could pick from. And then we'll, case of wine, utilizing exploratory, qualitative, and data collection in small organizations, identifying scope of work. So there were your cases. All right. Who's going to go first?
We would like to go first, Sheldon.
All right. So Sheldon, are we going to see your screen?
Okay.
All right, so let me get this to come here. All right, Sheldon. More. I am going to make you the host. Yes. All right, Sheldon, if you will claim the host.
Okay, present. Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me- Present from beginning. What about now?
No.
No.
Okay. I'm hitting share and present. Is it up on everyone's screen now?
No.
Mm-mm.
No. Okay. All right. Let me stop my share. I've done that before. All right. If you will, have you claimed host?
I just have to click present, right?
No, you've got to go to your taskbar. And do you have a taskbar that has participants on it?
Yes. Yes, I
All
do.
right. Under participants, it's going to let you, it'll list, when you click on that, it'll list participants. You can claim the host.
Present from beginning. Okay, anyone with the link. Share. Present. I don't see the taskbar with the with all the I mean, I see pictures, but no taskbar. And I've got present and share.
What kind of computer are you using?
I'm using a DEOL.
Dr. Lamb, I don't know if you changed anything on your side, but it disappeared for me too. It was there, and then once your face popped up on my main screen, it disappeared.
Terrence has started screen sharing.
Okay, that's why. Is that why that I can't, or is
Okay, we see case study 3 data gathering from Katie, Sheldon, and Terrence. Okay, we've got it on the screen. I don't know if it's you or Terrence who is sharing. So we now see agenda.
okay?
Why
That's
don't we
me.
hear?
That's me, but Terrence's face is up there, so we will go with that.
That sounds good to me. Uh-oh, we've lost it. There we go.
Okay. All right. Our case study 3, we actually selected case study 5, which was Dixie Weaving Incorporated. And obviously the scope of our work is to look at our data gathering process. So for our presentation, we're going to give you a little background on case study 5, as well as we're going to address some of the questions that we asked ourselves going into the data gathering process. And we also conducted an interview, which we, of course, had an interviewer, an interviewee, and someone taking notes. So we will also provide our feedback on our experiences in those roles. And at the end, we will talk about what we feel we've learned and some of the suggestions for conducting a successful interview. So with that being said, I'll start off with the background for case study 5. Dixie Weaving Company is a fabric company based in southeastern United States. They have approximately 1,500 employees across the country. Most of the employees are general laborers. They are not requiring their employees to have a lot of skill and no college degree. As of recent, the general manager and the HR director has really become concerned with their recent turnover rate, which is now a little above 40%, and is causing quite an alarm for the general manager in particular, because they do have a training program in place for all new hires. The training program is approximately 12 weeks. In our initial meeting with the HR director, the general manager, and some of the supervisors, we found out that a number of different things. But one of the things we found out is that a lot of the new hires don't have English as their primary language. So it's more so a second language, and that's also contributing to some of the communication issues. And of course, communication drives a number of different things. And so in addition to just communication issues, there are also some safety issues. And they've been having more accidents as of recent. So what we found initially through our initial discussions is that while turnover is over 40%, and that seems to be the primary issue that they are indicating based on the things that we uncovered just through the initial qualitative data gathering in terms of asking questions from the HR director to the general manager to the lead supervisors to the training folks. We feel that turnover may just be a symptom of what a deeper problem may be. So some of the questions that we asked ourselves going into this process was, what important business detail regarding data gathering and also access to the facility that we need to address. For example, who should we interview? And we concluded that we needed, of course, interview as many people that are impacted or are actually inputs to the turnover process. So that's from HR in terms of initially recruiting, selecting, training, to supervisors who are actually working with the people that's been hired, to the operators, to the training coordinators, as well as trying to get some feedback from the employees themselves. So we also wanted to break down, understand each aspect of that, from the hiring process, what's the job assessment, what's the job description that they're actually indicating that they're looking for, what are some of the minimum specifications that they need, i.e. is English a minimum specification? Is being bilingual a minimum specification? So we want to understand how they're actually selecting the people that they are bringing on board. And from there, we wanted to see, is there any formal training manual in place? What's the training process like? How up to date are the trainers in terms of their knowledge of the overall process? Do you have anyone from the line or from the shop/factory involved in that 12-week training process to give more of a realistic job preview of what to expect. And then from there, we wanted to drill a little deeper into what are the daily operations like? Are there productivity goals that's driving some of the injuries? What's the overall end-to-end process? How is the performance management actually made? Because we did get some feedback that some of the supervisors are frustrated with the new employees. And in addition to that, are they conducting any exit interviews? Because you have a 40% turnover rate, what are the people that are leaving indicating why they're leaving? Has there been any data gathered from that? And just a couple more things. The employee satisfaction, we wanted to drill into. Are they collecting any surveys? Are they basically getting some feedback from the employees about things that they are happy with or dissatisfied with? And finally, OSHA reports from a safety standpoint. I did mention that there have been a rash of injuries recently, and we want to know, are they actually observing OSHA requirements? Are they keeping track of injuries? What are they doing to prevent the injuries, just from an overall process standpoint? And secondly, one of the other questions we asked ourselves was, as we're going through this data gathering process, what may be some of the challenges with getting some accurate and candid feedback from the employees, and why they may not want to cooperate with us in this stage? And some of the things we came up with was, as we approached this, is that sometimes when you're getting information from employees of a company and they don't know who you are and they're considering you outsiders, they may not feel comfortable about how the information will be used, whether it's going to be used against them or not. In some cases, they may have a fear that they may be retaliated against if they were to tell the truth about their supervisor or their feelings about the job. So in some cases, they blame others and believe that it's somebody else's problem to fix, so they don't want to give any feedback. And also, they sometimes don't want to take any accountability and responsibility for their parts. So those were just a few of the questions that we thought about as we tried to approach our overall data gathering process. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Katie to drill a little deeper in terms of some of the things we asked on the front end.
So the next case study question was, do you agree with the multi-pronged diagnostic strategy outlined by Joe and Ian in their email to Bill? And how would you carry out each of the prongs they described? So yes, we did agree with that multi-pronged diagnostic strategy because it was very comprehensive. It included both the interviewing and also the historical data from job descriptions and past HR records. So we felt like it was a good comprehensive data collection to be able to get a good idea about what's going on in the facility. So do you agree or disagree with Joe and Ian's time estimates for this diagnostic phase of the project? And I'm an optimist, but this the facility has 1,500 employees, and most of which don't speak English. So 2 weeks was their estimate, and I felt like that was a little, that wasn't enough time to really be able to go in and look through all of the job descriptions and review the documents in addition to doing the interviews. And what factors should we consider in developing the estimate? The size of the factory, the number of employees, and the number of records that needed to be reviewed were all factors that, in my opinion, they underestimated the amount of time that they would need to do the data collection and then do the analysis. And so the next question is, let's see. Well, we then went into our question design. So I was the interviewer in this process. Sheldon was the interviewee, and Terrence was the note taker. So when I was designing the questions, I made them non-judgmental, open-ended questions, and I framed the questions around the data that we collected in the field, the job descriptions, and the historical knowledge that we had of things going on in the plant. I left them as open-ended as possible so that I did have the opportunity to pick up on things that Sheldon was telling me and then ask more probing questions about that. I designed the question to allow the respondent freedom in answering, tried not to be leading, and just open and ask the question in a way that allowed him to really tell me what was going on without me leading him to what I wanted to hear. Although the questions are not specific, they were framed well enough to potentially pick up on trends in the specific departments, the HR, plant floor, and the supervisors. And so the actual interview questions were, what did you find helpful or useful during the hiring process? What can the organization do to improve the hiring process? What would you suggest to the company to improve the training process? Are there any safety concerns on the plant floor? What improvements can be made to create a more positive experience for employees who work on the plant floor? What has been your experience regarding the communication flow between supervisors and workers on the plant floor? And what suggestions, if any, would you make to the organization that might positively impact retention rates? And so my experience with the interview process. So Sheldon was the plant manager that I was interviewing, and I tried to be very open with my body language, but also relaxed. I practiced reflective listening with him. I reframed what he was telling me and reflected it back to him just to get clarification on what exactly he meant. I wondered if some of the questions were too vague or too leading. And how at the end he asked me, what are you going to do with this information? And as an outside consultant, I felt some, tension or anxiety around how much information should I divulge to the interviewee, because we didn't want to spread any kind of paranoia throughout the factory. So how much information to give to the person that we're interviewing, and how much to kind of hold on to and let the supervisors actually deliver that information. So that's just one of the questions that we, one of the things that came up after the interview process. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Sheldon to talk about his experience as the interviewee.
Yeah, just from an interviewee's perspective, I thought that just from the beginning, Katie did a good job in terms of stating the purpose in terms of why she was there and asking me questions. So she made me feel comfortable about sharing any concerns that I had or any candid feedback I wanted to give. And one of the ways she did that was by asking some open-ended questions about how I felt about things, what did I think, how did I feel. So I thought that was good to get me to open up about my perspective. In addition to that, when you're asking open-ended questions, sometimes people tend to go off in different directions. So she was able to bring me back around and ask several follow-up questions just to pinpoint that she had a clear understanding of my feedback. So she didn't try to guide me or steer me towards a particular answer. I think she seemed very interested and open about getting genuine feedback. I thought that was good for me in terms of giving open information. And so I was able to express all of my concerns that I had. And so there was nothing that I felt that I didn't have the opportunity within that time period to give her my feedback. And we're going to turn it over to Terrence to talk about the note-taker experience from an objective standpoint. Terrence?
He's got to unmute. Let me see if I can. Let me see if I can do that. It's unmuted according to my. No. He is not muted. He's just got to turn his sound up.
I had the same problem this morning and I had to dial in. So Terrence, you may have to dial in.
Well, we know Terrence was here. Somebody just read this for Terrence.
Yeah, I will read it.
And if he can get dialed in, we'll let him join us later.
Okay. From a note-taker's experience, Terrence felt that the interview was a good experience. He believes that it's important for you to pay close attention and to be an active listener, to pay attention to detail, key words, and feedback and phrases. Sometimes people are saying certain things not as expressively as you would like, so just make sure you have a good ear for that. To also let them know you're taking notes and accurately gather the notes. And one thing he indicated was that he would do different is to intervene to ensure fully that he captured the answers and write down what they see. We talked about this in terms of our feedback session, that in addition to recording the interview, it's important to let the participant know that you're recording, and to record it so that you can go back later and make sure you replay it, because there could be language barriers, and especially in this particular case, there were some language issues and communication issues with some of the employees. So recording is important, but we think that it needs to be disclosed when you're doing that. And in conclusion, Katie, you want to do the last page?
Sure. So when we were wrapping up and talking about our conclusions from the interview, we thought it was a good idea to set a time limit in advance and stay within that time limit, so that for efficiency purposes, especially if you're interviewing a large quantity of people, definitely record the interview, have the questions ready to go, and be prepared to ask follow-up questions. And when you're asking open-ended questions, it's important to also guide the conversation without leading, so that you can keep your interviewee on target instead of going off topic. Be empathic and trustworthy, so the interviewee feels comfortable disclosing information basically to a stranger, especially information that they may perceive could affect their job or employment. And then finally, give thanks and show appreciation for the person taking the time to answer your questions. And so, do you guys have any questions?
No. Excellent job.
No. Thank you.
All right, I want Mike to weigh in on this one. This is right up his alley. Mike, are you there?
Yeah, you're talking about like the OSHA recordables and whatnot?
Let's go back early here in the slideshow. You folks did a great job in terms of the characteristics and the qualities that an interviewer must have. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Non-judgmental opening, this is wonderful technique. It's more than about asking questions. You must be a perceiver, and the goal is to basically have a conversation rather than a Q&A grilling session. And so interviewing is more than just reading questions. And y'all have done an excellent job with framing that. That's wonderful. Let's go back further in the presentation. This is just kind of an aside. Can we go back further in the presentation? Further back. Go back the other way now, one. All right, let's see. All right, right here. Mike, give us a quick rundown on what's really happening here.
So you got a couple things that you got to pay attention. One of the biggest things that I had struggled with when I first started working in this type of labor force. You go into higher education, and people don't trust you because they think they're smarter than you. When you go to this level of working, no one trusts you because they don't understand you. So a lot of times, like, you're going through and you might think that, oh, it's just a simple training issue, when really it's more of a comprehension issue. So when it says, you speak English, that's honestly, we have probably about 10% of our population. They're supposed to speak English, but they have it difficult with that. And turnover, no matter, I've been doing some research, you're going to have, quite a bit of turnover anyways. So trying to figure out, kind of weed through and find those trends are most important, because there's going to be someone will have something to complain about, always. But I guess that's my key takeaways.
Okay. Here's my takeaway, and I will acknowledge up front that I would have never thought of this, except I was in on something like this one time. Case Farms is big in the northwestern area of North Carolina. They have their own facilities, and then they contract with other poultry producers, and they have a big processing plant in Morganton. I don't know if any of you have ever been by there or seen the trucks. I actually saw two of their trucks on the road this week hauling chickens for processing. The majority of the people, it's a large operation. It kind of reminds me of this. They have a large operation, and the majority of their people are English is their second language, if at all. Most of them, they only have a first language, which is not English. But here's what we found. And please don't be judgmental here. This is an ugly statement. What we found is training was insignificant because they were illiterate in any language. So the idea that we would just translate everything into Spanish and everything would be written materials in Spanish, they couldn't read and write Spanish either.
Yeah.
And that was our problem. We were having the same issues here. Big turnover, a lot of accidents, a lot of injury, a lot of downtime, stopping the line, all that kind of stuff. Oh, we're providing staff development. We're posting signs in Spanish. They couldn't read those either. We didn't know that till we got in and started doing some qualitative work, and then we discovered it wasn't that they couldn't read English. They couldn't read. That was quite enlightening. When I included this case study, this is one of the ones that I picked for you. Goes with this one. I perceive that that's the real problem here, because again, I would have never guessed that if I hadn't been involved in one of these before. I would have never guessed that. The assumption is that these are ESL folks, English as second language, and if we train them in their native language, but most of them are only speakers. They are functionally illiterate, unfortunately. In the manufacturing processing environment with large numbers of laborers, not only do they not have a college degree, most of them don't read and write in their own language very well. So that's just kind of an aside on my part. And so that portends you can't survey them. You need to interview them. And that's kind of what that's kind of the hook in this one is quantitative data in terms of survey won't work here. You got to do the qualitative work because many of these folks, the language and literacy is the barrier here. That's your barrier here is language and literacy. And if you don't recognize that, then your data will be flawed. Quantitative data will not help you here. Survey. Only qualitative, talking with these folks is the only way that you're going to collect any sort of data that has any content validity. Let's quickly.
May I ask a question before we move?
Yes.
I'm very curious about recording interviews, particularly for this population. If trust is not, well, first of all, recording any interviews, but particularly for this group, what made you all come to recording the interviews?
Well, we wanted to be able to have the opportunity to play it back and to, in addition to just note taking, because sometimes when you're speaking and you're writing at the same time, and also listening for comprehension, you're doing three things, and you may miss something. And so we wanted to have the opportunity to record the information, and struggled a little bit, obviously, because obviously there are laws around recording people. Mm-hmm. And so we know that one, if we're going to do it, we need to disclose it. And so understanding that also can be a barrier for people not wanting to speak to you. So approaching it on the front end with trying to make that person comfortable about the purpose of what we're doing and for understanding, we thought was also key as well. So, so if you don't record something, you obviously can miss it. And so that was the rationale for wanting to record it.
But would you not follow up with clarifying questions versus recording? I understand that the issue you say about comprehension, but I'm just wondering about asking clarifying questions versus recording.
Well, we wanted to do both, to ask the clarifying questions, but also to record as well. Hmm. Is the question, is your thought process that if you opt to go with recording, that you're setting up an even higher barrier to get over with people being candid with you?
Yes, and in my experience of doing interviews, I've never experienced, even with our external folks coming in, people recording an interview session because of the, where does that recording go? Is that protected data? Besides the interview itself, and the relationship with the individual, I've just never experienced, and I probably would never do it, interview someone and record it.
Okay. No, it is a, I understand your point, and, and then there was somewhere in, I guess, whether it was on the exercise or in the case that they referenced that. I'm trying to see what section they reference actually recording. I can't pull it up right now. But good question. Dr. Lamb, you have any thoughts on that?
I prefer that in data collection situations, it's best to record if you can, for two reasons. One, you can let other people listen to those and get their take on the analysis of what was said, and also you can use some analytic softwares that will look for themes in what is said and sometimes we'll find things that you missed as the interviewer. With our dissertation students, we encourage them to record all interviews and use analytic software. It really works. I will have to, again, understanding I am not the qualitative expert, but I like what I see from the recorded sessions in the analytical software. There's a couple products on the market. I really like those. I would encourage you to get permission from people. I know that it might be a barrier, but if you have skill and can move them past that initial fear of being recorded to more of a conversation, there is a richness of data that you can pull out from recordings that you may miss just scoring an interview. As I told you, I went through a year-long qualitative process with the Gallup people, and one of the things that I learned from them is from listening to tapes and doing the analytic software and then going back to my own scoring sheets. And you can't see me now, but I've got that actual notebook in my lap right now. And what I learned we had to do evaluations of different kinds of media to show us and prove to us that we weren't as perceptive as we thought we were, that there were things that we missed when we just used the scoring sheets, that when we recorded it, that we were able to go back and listen later or view the videos or the tapes later and put them through software, and there were things that we missed. And that was the whole point, was demonstrating that that interviewing is more than just asking questions, and that it takes a long time and a lot of practice to actually be a perceiver rather than an interviewer. And so for my part, I always encourage students to record sessions if at all possible. That otherwise there's the possibility of missing. It helps with validity. To that end, you all know that validity is somewhat measurable when you're doing quantitative data, not so much when you're doing qualitative data. There are 7 types of validity, subsets of validity. The 4 that we're most concerned with as qualitative interviewers, and this is according to the American Psychological Association and the Equal Opportunity Commission, EEOC, these are the 4 types of validity that we're most concerned with. Content validity. Do the questions of the interview make sense given the job of which the interview is designed? So content validity is first. Do the questions make sense given the context? The second is construct validity. Does the interview hold up internally? Can the characteristics be measured in the interview exist within the same person? That's kind of an inter-rater reliability thing. Concurrent validity. Does the interview relate to present performance? And predictive validity. Do they predict future performance or results? Those are the 4 types of validity that we're concerned with being able to ensure when we're doing qualitative interviews: content, construct, concurrent, and predictive. That's not DEOL's opinion. That's from American Psychological Association and EEOC. Those are the things that we're concerned with. That's a lot. It's hard. Recording, taping, putting these things through analytic software really helps with those 4 types of validity. Now, if you don't do that, we're back to the integrity of the interviewer for the interviewer for the entire burden of validity and reliability. We're back to the judgment of the interviewer themselves. It's a quality control. It's an inter-rater reliability. When you're doing 1,500 employees, your samples, you can pull a sample from that population, but you may have multiple interviewers. I would not suggest that one person in a 2-week period of time could tackle a sample of that population. What do you folks think would be a representative sample of 1,500 to interview? given what you've learned this semester, what would be a representative sample to interview of 1,500 people?
Let's see.
Now, understanding that in quantitative terms, we would be looking at a minimum of 35% in power analysis for the results to be significant. We would have to have at least 35%. Now, we understand that doing interviews, we don't have to have as many. But what would be a reasonable amount, that a sample size to pull out of 1,500 that you could argue would be significant, that
About
would
maybe
reflect the bigger population?
500, perhaps?
Isn't it like 10 to 15%?
Yes. There you go.
Yeah.
Lisa, you're right for quantitative. It has to be at least 30 to 35. So you're right. Based on quantitative, it'd have to be 500.
Okay.
Tracy's right. For qualitative, it's 10 to 15%. It would have to be somewhere between 150 and 200 for the results to have any validity, for us to be able to, to say that these results are valid, that this sample is representative of the larger population. For qualitative work, you have to have 10 to 15%. I've told you that I all the time have doctoral students come in who apply quantitative methodology to qualitative, and they'll say, I've got to do 35% of these. No, it's 10 to 15. That's exactly right. But that's still between 150 and 200. What would be the possibility that one person could do all of those?
You'd have to have a very long time to get it done if you didn't split that work up.
Oh, of course you would.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. That's exactly right. That's a lot of people. And so realistically, one person could not do this. And then when you bring in more than one interviewer, then your issue becomes inter-rater reliability. What is inter-rater reliability?
Having that information transfer very similarly between raters. So when you're interviewing, they have to be interviewed in the same way. Or if you're looking at documents and you're rating the documents, they have to be rated very closely to each other and get the same points or same results. And if that doesn't happen, then you have to send it to a third party.
That's right.
As an objective eye to then view it themselves without the bias of the other two's ratings. And then those have to be triangulated, and whichever one that third person is closest to gives you that inter-rater reliability.
That's correct.
We had that happen a lot with we had a merit award. Every year we apply for merit awards for our schools, and multiples of them had to go through the third process for the inter-rater reliability. And then that speaks to the training, like going back to your point, Dr. Lamb, the training that you went through. This organization is trying very hard to have consistent judges that are there year after year after year. They're trying to contract them so that they train them once, and then all they're doing is refreshers to remind them on the rubric, and then telling those same people which parts of the rubric might have changed, rather than getting in 1 or 2 or 3 new judges every single year, or maybe more than that. And then that blows everything to pieces. And so, you can kind of tell the years that happens, because they end up being behind on their ratings and having to because they're sending out more of these documents to that third person to validate that inter-rater reliability. So it's a process, and it takes forever.
Yes. And so for that reason, especially if you're using multiple interviewers, it's good to record them and put them through the analytical software. And that's what that does, is help you with your reliability. Did we score everything the same? If not, again, we go back to the integrity of the interviewer, and not only their integrity, their skill.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
and we're trying to take as much variation out of this process as we can. That if Tracy, Lisa, and I hear the same interview, we come to relatively the same conclusion. The analytical software helps us, but training as a perceiver, as an interviewer, really helps as well. I recently, in my role as Mel's chair here at the college, I recently was involved in with a group who were, it was Principal of the Year candidates at a local school district. And they brought me in basically to work on inter-rater reliability, because in the past, they had trouble gaining consensus among this panel of lay people as to who the winner was, who should be the nominee going forward. Because they all had their own agendas. Right. A group of 5. I mean, these are lay people from the community. One was a pastor, one was an attorney, one worked in an advocacy agency. One was a city official or a county official. It was all people who are stakeholders in public education in that district, but they're all lay people. And what I realized when I walked in, and I knew that's what I was facing, is these people would all see these interviewees from their own perspective, from their own experience, rather than following the rubric that was given out by the Wachovia Corporation, who runs Principal of the Year in North Carolina. And so my job was to get them to understand, not to view it from the perspective of their experience, but to view it from the rubric that we were asked to apply. So the first thing I asked folks in the central office was, are you looking to reward the person you feel that did the best job this year? Or are you looking for the person who can go furthest in the competition? And they said, of course, we want the person who can go furthest in the competition. And that's when I said, aha, then you've got to follow the rubric that Wachovia puts out in terms of the criteria that they're looking for in this interview process. And so my job was to keep everybody on track for inter-rater reliability, and we did that, and it was amazing. When we got through the interviews of all the candidates that day, we had them all, the group all ranked the candidates. We had, from past experience, they had all the interviews lined up, and then they had a significant block of time for the deliberations. When we got through that day, the deliberations took 1 minute because everybody had the candidates ranked in the same order because they had followed the rubric. So I made the mistake of being competent. Now I've got to do it again. I've already been invited to come back and do this again. They couldn't believe that at the end of this process, there wasn't some big fist fight in the room about who everybody just, the order of the candidates. Well, it was very simple. We understood our goal was to find the person who through this rubric could go the furthest in the competition set up by Wachovia Corporation, Wachovia Principal of the Year. It's now got a different name, but it's the same. It's the same. It's the same process that's been in place for several years. That was initially set up by the Wachovia Corporation when they did this. It's been taken over by another group now, obviously, but it's still the same. It's still the same criteria. Oh. And so the issue for me that morning was, I had 30 minutes with these people before the interviewers started coming in to get them to understand that this was not about your own personal bias. I couldn't say it that way, but this was about following the rubric. This is what we're supposed to be looking for here. And so I only had 30 minutes to work on inter-rater reliability with them. Maybe it was just luck, but at the end of the interviews, we all had the same, all the candidates ranked in exactly the same order. So maybe Dr. Hamilton has rubbed off on me. Maybe I'm a better qualitative person than I thought I was, or maybe it was just luck.
Or you just don't want to admit it.
Maybe it was just luck. We would have to run a Pearson's goodness of fit model to see if it was significant or it was just luck. But anyway, it came out. So in the end, I would, if at all possible, try to record these things, especially if you're going to have more than one person. When you're talking about the numbers and the time constraints here, how many people do you estimate that it would take to interview this many people? 150 is the minimum here. You got 2 weeks, you got 150 people. How many people, how big should your team of interviewers be?
Probably 5 to, yeah.
Five would be the minimum. That's exactly right. 5 would be the minimum. 25 interviews. You've got 10 days. I would suggest trying to not do more than 3 interviews a day. That's one of the things that I impressed upon that school district is that don't bring us in 10 finalists. We really can't do more than 3 a day.
Okay.
After that, it starts running together in your brain. And you really can't do more than, and be effective now, you really can't do more than 3 interviews a day. You can't just run them through like cattle. Remember, we're not just asking questions, we're trying to perceive at the same time. So 3 a day. 3 a day. So yes, Sheldon, you would need, for a 10-day period, you'd need a minimum of 5. Any fewer than that, and you should have just done a survey. Now, let's speak to, quickly, before we move on, let's speak to focus group. Would focus group be appropriate in this situation? I want everybody to weigh in. Just give me a simple yes or no.
I don't think so, unless you have really competent translators. And also, I don't know.
Oh, we've gone.
Is that me?
Off the rails. No, I don't think so.
I think also because of the fear of the population, they may not want to be exposed like that in a group. So my opinion is, I don't know that a focus group would be the best thing to do.
Okay, somebody else.
I would agree with Lisa because of the possibility of translation issues here, where if one person misunderstands something and starts speaking to that, and then the rest of the group chimes in, then you've kind of derailed. So I would not do it because of the translation issues.
Anybody else?
I think they're a good idea. So the population that I work with, I know this is probably not the most professional way of saying it, but you know the whole like snitches get stitches snitches get stitches kind of thing.
Yep.
We talk about that. People tend not to say anything if they know that it's going to be recorded, or if they're going to take down their name or their login. So for us, when you have, like, we do roundtables, and everyone kind of like bands together when you have a complaint. So it gives them a little bit more confidence when it comes to, say they have something, if they have other people around them that are complaining about something, they feel more open to saying the same stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think focus groups can be helpful in this situation too, because this seems to be a systemic problem. I mean, it's happening across the board. There are a lot of different issues. And to the extent you can bring a group of supervisors together, a group of training coordinators together, a group of employees together, I think you may get a comprehensive viewpoint of what are some of the root causes in that particular area. And so I think that could be helpful. I mean, especially given the size and scale of the population.
Mm-hmm. That is a way to work, you know, to try to defeat the numbers here in terms of you can get more people at one time. I would caution you, my only caution would be, back to Lisa's point, when you're working with blue collar workers, especially if there's a language barrier, it may kind of dissolve into everybody sitting around the table staring at one another. It works better. It works better if everybody speaks a common language. Focus groups work better. When language is a barrier, focus groups sometimes don't work as well. So that would be, in this particular case, that might be an issue trying to do focus groups here is the language problem. But in general, Sheldon's point's right. If you can bring everybody together, they are a way to collect more data faster. But back to Lisa and Tracy's point, when you've got a population that doesn't speak English, focus groups kind of maybe not appropriate for that particular population. So that's one of those things that you have to make the call as the researcher. Is language such a barrier that we really can't put these groups together, or once we put them together, that language is not a barrier and we can talk between as Sheldon said, the different levels of the organization and get different perspectives to the same problem. That's kind of where you are with this, and that's left totally up to you as the researcher, as the consultant, with what will yield the best data, and that's what you're looking for here. Remember, the goal here is to collect the best, richest, most valid data, most reliable data. That's your job, good or bad. We're concerned with methodology here. Collecting data that is the most valid and reliable. If language is a barrier, that would speak to the validity of your data. If you have variation in interviewers, that would speak to the reliability. So remember, validity and reliability are not just quantitative things. They also are qualitative. They're also qualitative considerations. Very good. Very good. Very good. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to reclaim the host. I am now the host. And so who's going to be our next person?
We can go.
All right. So who's going to go now?
We'll go.
All right. So Tracy, are you going to claim the host?
No, Mike is.
Mike is going to. Okay, let me get to Mike. All right, let me go to Moore, make him the host. Yep, I do want to change him to the host. There we go.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me here present. All right, everybody. We are going to talk to you about the gathering data case study, but we're going to focus a little bit more on case study number 3, which is talking about Resolute Winery. Some of you probably remember that from DEOL, the first class or second class? Can't remember which one I did. First class. Yeah. So what we're going to talk about here is just kind of going through our gathering data. We're going to review shortly just the Resolute Winery. Really the point of this case is to talk about designing questions and interviewing skills. But we're going through answer those questions and then kind of go from there. So with gathering data, so we've all seen the case study itself. But really this is more of a qualitative exercise. So trying to understand what is it that, or what are our current state when it comes to interviewing skills. Really trying to see if we can kind of catch some of those secondary or body language identification. So trying to see if there's anything else hiding within our interviews itself. There's a way that the case is set up. It's more of that 360 review. So we have a interviewer, interviewee, and then someone who's taking notes to kind of give us a little bit more of the stuff that we might not catch, or facial expressions or whatnot. And then case 3, which is about Resolute Winery, is a cultural evaluation. So this actual case is kind of talking about the cultural evaluation of a winery, which I'll talk about here. Really, what is it that we need to know, and what is said and what needs to be observed. And that's where we can kind of go through, conduct and center questions. So with case summary, just real quick, kind of want to remind everybody about the case that we talked about. This is about Resolute Winery. So this is a winery that it's a family business, but as you guys can read right there, it says a not so family business. So the current owner is one of the last people of the family who I think it's been passed down a couple generations. So right now or the case itself, we're kind of following Dr. Michaels, who's a consultant, and evaluating why the business isn't doing well. So the reason why it's kind of a baffling for the current owner is that the wine is, it's fantastic. It's award winning. Their marketing plans are, really good, in the organizational structure. So I put that, I put there facetiously speaking. So if you remember, they had an HR consultant come in, and a lot of the times, we're not going to go into, the recommendations that we had for the actual case study that we did back, first class. But if you guys remember, we basically had to redo what the HR rep did. We had to go through and kind of fix some of the issues that HR rep product came in and made for the organization. In areas of opportunity. So right now we're kind of looking at more of that qualitative and quantitative piece. So high employee turnover rate, so trying to decrease that turnover rate, declining cultural buy-in. So the actual, we're not really a family business. There's some people who just think it's a job and whatnot. And then poor customer referral rates. So even though they have the best wine or award-winning wine, they don't know why their customers are either not coming back or they're not getting the same referrals that they used to get. So we're going to turn it over to Courtney here, and we're going to talk about our learning objectives, and then I'll turn it over.
So looking at the learning objectives, we first want to develop a clear understanding of the organization's culture through survey results and data interpretation. We also want to establish clear job expectations and staff responsibilities as a team, so the employees are unsure or unclear of their responsibilities. Looking also at identifying areas of mistrust and high turnover. We want to create a strategy to increase team communication, collaboration, and workflow efficiency. Provide suggestions to increase staff recognition and employee retention, and analyze data to make best recommendations to the client. And now I will hand it over to Tracy, who will review the design questions, part 1 and part 2.
So a couple key things here for designing the questions is Courtney kind of told you what we were kind of looking for with our questions, but we wanted to think, what kind of questions do we need to be asking? How do we need to be asking them? So we talked about asking questions that yield powerful information, making sure that we have open-ended questions, avoiding those yes or no's. So like a question like, do you feel supported? Yes or no? And how do we ask that differently to get more information? Also think back questions, so questions that make them reflect as opposed to saying, well, I would like to see this, actually telling us what they have seen in the past. And then questions that get them involved. So they have to think, they have to reflect, they have to expand on those type of questions. And then we wanted to start our interview kind of general and get more specific as we went along. And then asking questions like how, what, and where. So the questions we came up as a group, and I've kind of broken these up into introductory, transition, key, and ending questions. So our first introductory questions were, how are you involved in the organization? Because it's really important for us to understand everyone's role. And we think that there may be some issues going on here about people don't actually know their role. And so that might kind of give us some of that information. And then, of course, as Mike said, we have some issues with culture. And so we wanted to know what people actually thought the culture of the winery was. So how would they describe that? Moving on, what are the values that guide your work? Because as Mike said, this was a family organization before, but some of that is missing. And so we really need to know what the values are currently. And then what does a training process look like for new hires? Because if you guys will remember back in the old case, that was one of the issues here, is that they would get new hires and then there would be a high turnover rate because those people weren't staying. So we want to kind of know, are they getting any sort of orientation? Do they understand what their roles are? And then our key questions, as Mike and Courtney both identified, are people aren't really understanding their responsibilities here. And so we kind of wanted to delve into how do you know what your job responsibilities are? How is your performance measured? And then how often do you actually review that process to ensure that they are working? And then our ending questions are, how employees at Resolute Winery valued? And in what ways are employees encouraged to work together? Because it seems to not be a lot of teamwork going on here. And what is one thing you would change about the company if you could? So then we wanted to talk about the roles. And so our group decided to focus on like what are some really important things for each role member to do. So we've kind of just broken that up into the interviewer themselves they should have a great knowledge of the topic. They should be able to understand the questions that they're asking, understand the responses that they're getting. They should be free from distractions. So you don't want to have all these different things at your cell phone going off and things like that. You want to make sure that you're having that one-on-one conversation with them. You want to be familiar with the questions that you're asking and which order you're asking so that you can ask appropriate follow-up questions. And then, as we've talked about many times, you want to make sure that you're also observing facial expressions, body language, the tone of voice, even how like someone's sitting in their chair. And then you want to provide an overview of the session to get the session going. So make sure you set your agenda at the beginning of the session, and so that your interviewee feels safe and respected and understands what's going to happen that day. You also want to use effective pauses and probes. And so letting the interviewee kind of think for a minute before you jump in and interrupt them. And then you kind of want to control the responses to the best of your ability. So if you're kind of trailing off into spaces that you don't really necessarily want to go, you can kind of control that. Then from the interviewee standpoint, like their role is to feel safe in that interview place and actually respect that safe space. So to be open and to answer the questions the best of their ability. And then also as an interviewer, you want to make sure if you don't understand a question to clarify. And that role can kind of go back to the interviewer to kind of read that body language to see if the interviewee isn't really understanding something. And then the note taker has a really important role, as they are looking for clarity and consistency. They're also looking for key points and themes that happen throughout the interview that the interviewer may not be picking up on. So they can actually, if they're identifying those themes, have some follow-up questions. And then they also immediately after the interview need to sit down and review their notes with their team and make sure that everything is clear.
So next we're going to look at gathering data and the discussion questions. For question number 1, reflect on your experience designing the questions. Did your questions elicit the data you had hoped to gather? Were there questions you wish you had asked? So the questions did elicit data that we hoped to gather, and it allowed us to reflect on the organizational culture, structure, and processes. The questions we asked covered the areas that we felt were most important, but doing a deeper dive into culture and data is always value added. For question number 2, as the interviewee, how did you feel about the experience? Did the interviewer put you at ease at the start of the interview? Did the interviewer seem genuinely interested in your responses? And could you express what you had hoped to get across? Was there additional information that you wanted to share but could not, and why? So the interviewer was easy to work with and clear in their questioning. Overall, it was a positive experience. The interviewer was engaged and actively listening to the answers. I worked to express verbally and non-verbally my points and thoughts. And I did feel that there were challenges that surfaced during the interview, but were not expected. But I was able to share positive outcomes as well, as they were well received. Looking at discussion question number 3 for the interviewer, how did it feel to conduct the interview? How did you set the interviewee at ease and explain the purpose of the interview? Which of your interview questions did you find most effective, ineffective? And with what you know now, which questions would you rephrase? Conducting the interview was a great experience in preparing for a consultancy role and dealing with future clients. By explaining the purpose of the interview and the goals, the interviewee was at ease and ready to participate in the interview. It became a fluid, organic conversation. The most effective questions focused on metrics related to performance and processes. The introductory questions around culture were good to initiate conversation and set the stage for the interview. However, they only gave surface information and not enough information around measures, data, and evaluation. The ending question, what is one thing you would change, could be rephrased to what would you change and keep about the company. Number 4, for the note taker, reflect on the note-taking process. Did you accurately capture the interview in your notes? What would you do different next time? And as an observer, what additional questions would you suggest for the next interview? The notes were accurately captured, as well as detailed content and quotes. Recording the interview would be an effective option if all parties were open to it. Reorganizing the order of the questions around job responsibilities would be helpful. And those should come first, then questions around value and culture. And discussion question number 5, what lessons are to be learned about conducting interviews effectively? Listening is key. Clarifying questions may be necessary. And in addition, verbal responses and nonverbal communication, i.e. body language, can convey information. Also, practice is important to improve. And now I will hand it over to Mike to review the case analysis and key takeaways.
So just to kind of summarize everything that we just talked about, some of our key takeaways that we discussed and some of the things that we came up with that I think were really important for us to understand. So as consultants, or if anyone who goes in to advise organizations, we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions. So not only understanding our purpose, but why we're actually there and what are the goals of the people that we're trying to serve. So when we're going through and actually taking this more of the qualitative piece, making sure that we have guided questions and that are open-ended instead of just getting those yes or no binary questions answered, trying to really deep dive and see if there's anything that might be hiding, something under the surface, or some things that are really bothering folks. Our interviewing skills require more than just hearing. So we talk about, I heard you, but did you actually listen? Are we observing everything? We're using what we're seeing to infer and being able to guide that communication or guide those questions. So no matter what we do as consultants, we won't be able to write down or plan for every single question that we might have. So making sure that if we are listening and observing, then we can use our inference skills to potentially start asking more questions or start deep diving in different areas. And listening can be one of the hardest jobs of the interviewer. So a lot of times, for us, we are already starting to think about what we're going to talk about next. So making sure that we, kind of keep ourselves, check ourselves, and making sure that we're listening and actually hearing, writing down what's important, and then moving on from there. So we had a couple references, but I'll move over to questions.
Excellent job. Anybody have any questions?
Just a quick question. I love the phrase think back that you were talking about, Tracy, in terms of asking think back questions. I think that's a good terminology to use. What would you say would be an example of like a participative question? I was trying to get wrap my arms around that terminology, and you said participative question.
Can you go back to our questions, Mike? I'm trying to see. So I think one participative question is, how often do you review your processes to ensure that they're working? So that makes the person think, okay, what are my processes? How do I know that? And then are we reviewing them? And if we are reviewing, how am I actively reviewing them? So it just gets them involved. So they're not just talking about the manager or someone else's role, it's their own role, and how are they doing that, and in what way are they participating in that?
Okay, I got it. Okay, thank you.
Because I think when we, I think when we ask interview questions, sometimes we say, like, what is management doing? What is so-and-so doing? But we don't actually ask, like, what's your actual role, and in what ways are you participating in these things? And so I think that's important.
Okay.
Can you go to the next slide? Then go back to that slide. Okay. Let's do, okay. Okay, let me answer this email right quick from a student. All right. Let's look at, again, we're looking at processes today. Let's look at this process right quick. In the lens of validity again. Do the questions in the interview make sense given the job for which the interview is designed? And so I would say yes, because they're asking them what their responsibilities are, and making sure that the questions make sense according to what they do there. So you first thing you find out is what do they do there? Do they know what they do there? And that's that. So that does the content validity, that satisfies that requirement. Does the interview hold up internally? Do these characteristics exist? Yes, I'd say that. Concurrent, present performance, yes. Predictive ability, so yes. When you design your questions, you have to, again, we're looking for validity. How we interview and record and analyze speaks to reliability, but the design of the interview itself speaks to those 4 types of validity. And so I think you've got all of those covered right here. So that, again, validity, reliability. Validity is what questions you're going to ask. Reliability is the format that you ask them in. And it goes back to what I was referring to a few minutes ago. If you're trying to do, one person is trying to do 20 interviews a day, I would have issues with reliability. I think 3 a day is all you can do. And the data tells us that. So excellent job here. Again, this is about your methodology. This is about data gathering, which is about methodology. It's, today's focus is not really on the outcome of the analysis, but how do you set up to make sure that a qualitative analysis is both reliable and valid. Excellent job.
Can I just say one thing for the group? Our reference slide, that first reference that's listed there, if anyone's doing focus group interviews, it's a fabulous resource that I found. So,
Cool.
and I don't know, Dr. Lam, you can look at it and actually validate it, but
Yes.
it is really detailed, and it was super helpful for me in setting up my methodology for that.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah, that's a good one.
Us?
I'm sorry?
Will someone from the group send it out to us? Because we don't have a copy. Okay.
All right. I believe that those folks have worked with the Haberman Institute there at the University of Minnesota. I actually went through the Haberman process as well. So I would concur that's good stuff. Um, um, okay. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, who's gonna, do we have another presentation?
Yes, me. Go to me. Let me get to my the slides first.
Let me reclaim the host. I am now host. I am going to make Lisa the host. Yes. And she will now claim host. Lisa is now the host.
Can you guys see me?
We can see you, but not your screen.
Okay, it's telling me I'm the host now. Hold on a minute and let me get to the, okay, hold on. Can you guys, am I still on the call?
Yes.
Yes, you're still there.
Okay, I see you, Dr. Lamb. But you guys can't see my screen, right? Oh, hold on. Hold on. Okay, wait. Share screen.
Yes.
Let me pick the one I'm sharing. Let's see if it's this one. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yes.
Alrighty. Okay, let me make it big. Okay. So our group, Daryl Hilton, Sheila Person-Scott, and Lisa Thompson, and we are talking today about the exploratory qualitative data collection in small organizations. And this is based on the Multicultural Community Connections Organization, of which Olivia Johansson is the program director, and she is creator of the Bridges program, which is a new program under the umbrella of the MCC. Laura and Isabel are actually employees of MCC, and they have been assigned to oversee Bridges, which is the summer camp. And then also the teachers and assistants of Bridges are also part of that entire group. Within this case study, Gloria Stevens is the executive director of the consulting firm that was eventually brought in. Brock and Jessica, as well as Jamie and Nicole, are also people that work for that organization of the integrated solutions.
So I think if I can start by saying that we worked on case 4. And in this case, again, there were discussions about people who had language barriers. And the parent company wants to help students and teachers, but particularly teachers, to get them clear around tolerance, knowledge about diverse populations, and support student success in the American educational setting. The teachers were developed and were to develop and implement tools and strategies in the classroom that encourage communication between the students and the teachers. But the students have diverse cultural backgrounds. The case talks a lot about Hispanic students, but there are African Americans and other, it's a multicultural, let me say it that way, group of people. The intent is to build and maintain collaborations, not only between the students and the teachers, but through the community and family members. And so when we look at the primary goal of this organization, they want to help diverse immigrant populations adjust to the culture, but mainly the Southern culture. And then the current initiative is to improve the educational experience of these students, their families, and teachers go through development to also help them and other members in the community.
So in that, all of that, and the reason that this consulting firm was brought in is that there are a lot of organizational pressure points. Bridges was in about its first week of implementation when things really started to kind of come apart. And we find that more in the documentation that we're going to go over in just a little bit, and the organizational observations that we did. But I think that this is a very telling quote. Olivia, who is the person over the whole organization, stated to the consulting company that she just wanted them to fix the damn problem. So when we get into that, some of the qualitative data that we looked at was significant numbers of documents that provided the following information. So we've got number of students that are enrolled in Bridges for the first year are 45. And these two full-time folks that I mentioned before oversee the Bridges Summer Camp, the ones that went from MCC over to be assigned to Bridges Summer Camp. The other members of the MCC staff visit and check in on the children and help the children adjust to the teachers intermittently, but there's no real schedule for that. The camp moderators, they're full-time teachers that have been recruited. They are receiving continual ed credits and stipends for participating, and 5 have been hired, and they bring an average of 8 years of teaching experience with them. So just let that sink in a little bit. Teachers are having challenges with the migrant students and their families, which is those pressure points are instructional and relational. The teachers are white middle class teachers, and one is male, but however, 2 of the teachers are also African American females. So you can kind of see the spread there of the diversity in the teachers. Undergrads are also hired as teaching assistants, and the reason they were hired is because either they're planning on becoming elementary ed teachers or they're fluent in Spanish. They all participate in a week-long orientation training before the 6-week camp, and the training focuses on cultural dynamics associated with teaching diverse students, groups of students, and they also read about language barriers and poverty in migrant populations. Documents continue to provide information about what the faculty members are required. The members and their assistants are required to attend workshops with speakers from Latin American and African nations. And then, as I said before, the camp was running for about a week and things started to fall apart. And those things were due to inexperienced staff running the program, lack of organizational structure for the students, translation problems, which relates back to the other when we were talking about relational issues, lack of administrative processes for the camp, lack of day-to-day operational plans, poor communication between Bridges and its parent organization, and a lack of point of contact for that summer camp. In a phone transcript of a conversation, Olivia feels that those people that she assigned to Bridges are not doing a good job of overseeing the program, and she's annoyed because she feels like she found extra money to support them in doing that. And she also feels pressure because she says that there are lots of donors that support that particular program. Other things that were studied were job descriptions for the folks that work there, policy manuals, personnel files, recruitment materials, training manuals, and post-training evaluation data, and then the operation schedule for the camp, and or the lack thereof was also studied within these documents. Teachers do not have clear job descriptions. They do go through training prior to the camp. And then we also found that the staff assigned to Bridges, those 2 people that we mentioned, don't have details for their duties. The teacher assistants don't have clear descriptions as to what their expectations are. And a few other things that are important. Olivia and her assistant were the only ones that met with the teacher assistants before the first day of camp. In other words, they didn't get to know the teachers with whom they were working. And then the external materials were not all written in English and Spanish. And it's important to note here that this is a different situation than our first case study that was talked about today, because these parents are all literate, and the folks that are working at the center are literate. So having those materials in English and Spanish would mean something and would be relevant, but those materials are not all in English and Spanish.
There was also a process of observation done with the consulting firm, and there are a couple of things I want to point out. I'm not going to go through all of these because I think some of it comes up in the documents that were the data from the documents that Lisa just reviewed. We observed two parents coming in having questions and unaware of who to direct the questions to. They actually direct the questions to one of the consultants. It was really clear that the students were engaged with each other doing breakfast, and also a couple of the assistants were, and the two African-American teachers were also involved with the students. The breakfast goes beyond the allotted time, and this agitates one of the teachers. That why can't we start on time? She's exasperated by the students being late. The students do have materials. One of the teachers that we observed communicates in English, and then the assistant repeats it in Spanish. And there is some eye contact given between the assistant to the teacher of that one could assume, confusion in her communicating in English when she knows that there are people who have English as a second language and some who do not speak English. There is a student who still does not understand, and a Spanish-speaking student gives the instructions to a fellow student, and that teacher mistakes it because she doesn't understand the language that the student is working on the peers project. And then they have a break at 10:30. After starting at 9:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, they have a break at 10:30. Next slide.
I'm sorry?
The next slide was saying. There is also observation done in another classroom. And in the first classroom, the assistant cleans up the room. And in this classroom, the teacher is cleaning up the room and the assistant takes the children outside. So there's difference in how the different classrooms are run. The teacher gives permission slips, and this is where one of the documents was found that the permission slip was written in English and not in a dually in English and in Spanish. And then when Olivia gets wind of the fact that it's not written in Spanish and English, she rewrites the permission slips on the spot. Lisa?
So clearly we really need some more data. We cannot get at what we need without having interviews conducted. And so our rationale for the guide that we created was to gain a better understanding of the organization's culture, because there does seem to be a lot of issues there. Understanding the organization's structures and systems, or lack thereof, and then gaining a better understanding of that leadership, Olivia and others in that organization. And the way that we structured our interview questions, which Sheila is going to go over in just a minute, we had a lot of discussion around the interview questions and the types of questions that we were going to ask, and depending on the role of the participants, sometimes determined to whom the questions were asked. And sometimes our question types were asked to multiple people because that's how we structured them. And then we expect that with the results of the interview questions, we'll be able to determine what actions or next steps should be taken.
So the questions are broken up into culture, structures and systems, and leadership. And so I'm not going to go through all these, but as you see, there are some questions for Olivia, One of the things that we want to do is find out how is she selecting teachers, hence the first question. And then we're asking the teachers what attracted you to the job, and what keeps you in the job. There is some credit given for the training and for the six-week experience for the teachers. And we just need to get to the point, why are these teachers here? We don't know what the specific accountabilities are for the 2 people who are responsible for running the Bridges program. And so we have a question asking Olivia that. There is a comment, and we hear in our observations one of the teachers talking about the mission of Bridges, or MCC, I'm sorry, and it says that they're not following that mission. And so we want to find out how it's demonstrated in the day-to-day activities, or if it is. So what is another question? We really want to know from the teachers and the assistants about the relationship between the 2. We want to know from everyone what they think the overall impact of the program is to the community. You know, are they doing what they intend to do? And, you know, the last question, in a perfect world with no restrictions, in what way do you see the program functioning? What way do you see it impacting the community? So we really want to take the question outside of the organization to figure out if their mission that they say they have and the outside result is obtained.
Also, we divided these questions up too, not only by the people that we are going to ask, but also the categories that we felt that these questions addressed. And you can see those listed down the left-hand side, where we categorize them according to culture, structures and systems, and then leadership. And then our conclusions and our action steps based on our qualitative data is, clearly we have organizational structure and leadership issues. And then the data does show that if these issues are not addressed for the Bridges program, the director is not going to meet her goals. And it could very easily, everything could very quickly turn to where Bridges is not functioning if these things are not addressed. We wanted to use these qualitative data and documents to look at those specific areas that need to be addressed, and then to be able to present them to her on what actions need to be taken. Our predicted outcomes, especially on the interview data, is that interview data is going to provide us with especially more subtle issues affecting the organizational structure, leadership challenges that are at this particular organization. So that's it. If you have some questions, we would be glad to entertain those now.
Excellent presentation. Can you go back a few slides and I'll tell you to stop?
Yes.
Here we go.
The questions?
Yeah, the question.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
All right. Do these hit our, do these speak to validity? I think they do.
I was actually going through those questions while you were speaking about that before to see if they did. And so I was looking at, which ones are construct, which ones are predictive, which ones are concurrent, and then which ones were content. And I do think across the board, I think we did hit them all. Yes,
you did. And I like the way that you did your categories: culture, structure, and systems, and leadership. Again, that helps you hit all those categories, helps you hit all of your areas of validity. Whether you intended it or not, you came out, where you needed to be on that. But yes.
Of course we did. Of course we intended that.
Of course you did.
Of course we did.
Of course we did.
I love it when a plan comes together.
See?
But today, each of the 3 groups, the content of your questions and how you have to be concerned in qualitative methodology, again, with reliability and validity. Reliability is the conditions that, that you conduct the interviews under, and then validity is the content of your questions. And those are the things that you must be concerned with. Now, on a personal note, I look at this one and I think Olivia was the person hiring for this program, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was Olivia's role? What position and what role does Olivia have?
Well, she is the person who has created this brainchild of Bridges, and wants this to be successful. It's kind of a love of hers. She has been touted as being this big visionary. Yeah.
Well, and she's basing it on her personal experiences. She's an immigrant herself.
Right.
And so she wants to do something for people who are like her.
Yes. All worthy goals. All very humanitarian. What's her problem, though? Boil it down to me. Boil it down for me.
This was to me,
question number one. What's Olivia's real problem?
I think the problem is that she kind of threw this away. Like, she thought that she could put a structure in place and just throw it together and throw people at it and not really give it much thought that it was sort of going to run itself.
Yeah.
I think she's got a big ego a little bit.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, just a little bit, because she's been clearly touted as being this visionary person, but that doesn't give you the ability to create a program and then just don't put any structures in place just because
there you go
and think it's going to happen.
Everybody has ideas except for me. I've told you I have no original thought. I'm an operations guy. But everybody has great ideas. It's the execution.
Mm-hmm.
And her cardinal sin here is she hired people for one reason, but she expected them to perform at a different reason. Let me explain that. I feel like she made some political hires here. And people who weren't hired for the right reasons, who didn't have the skills and abilities to actually do the job that she wanted them to do, and then she's mad at them now. She hired people who were not bilingual. She hired people who had no cultural appreciation, but she hired them for political reasons. Why might she have hired those white people? That's kind of a racist characterization, but basically that's what she did.
The teachers, you mean? Are you talking about the teachers?
Teachers.
Or are you talking the people that she just threw in place and said, "Here, Bridges is your thing. Go do it." Yeah,
exactly. But I mean, in all cases here, it appeared to me that she made some political hires because of donors and stakeholders into this. She made some political hires that had no business whatsoever being in this program.
Well, and she didn't. I mean, it doesn't sound like she gave the Isabel. What is their name? Isabel and Laura and Isabel. It doesn't sound like she gave them the opportunity, or anybody on her staff, to really interview for that position of being in charge of Bridges. That
Right.
She threw them over there and said, "Go run this," and then she got mad because they couldn't.
Exactly.
So it makes the whole thing makes zero sense about.
She hired people based on one criteria, but then she held them accountable on another. She hired them for their political connections, but then she held them accountable for their leadership and management skills.
Right.
They are not. That happens a lot in organizations. We hired you because you were the politically correct hire.
Yeah.
But you didn't have the skills that we needed, and we hold you accountable for outcomes that you didn't have. I think back to when I first came to Charlotte Mecklenburg schools. And my wife was recruited along with me, and we were about midway of our careers in the business, and we were recruited to come. And after we got to the district, there was a similar program to this run in the district at Double Oaks over off Statesville Road. They have a PAL Police Athletic League has a building over there where they play ball and they have class, and they could walk down to the school and have lunch. And they had a summer program over there, and the person who was in charge of that for the district put the full court press on me to get my wife to teach in that summer program. And she did, and she enjoyed it. And she was obviously, by all accounts, a great teacher, way overqualified for that. But I always felt like that they didn't really care. They didn't hire her because she was a teacher. They needed a white upper class lady to give the program some credibility in certain communities that were funding the program. They didn't want to go over there and see a bunch of people that didn't look like them. I think my wife's role was to look like the people who were cutting the check for the summer program. That she could actually teach and had worked in summer programs and did that was just a bonus. I don't think they recruited her for that reason. But that's an anomaly. Usually when you recruit those people because they look a certain way, it makes donors feel comfortable. Generally, they don't have the skills to do the job that you hired them for. You hired them for their look. I think that's a lot of what went on here is you hired people based on, we need to have people that look a certain way here. Everybody can't be one way. The donors would make them uncomfortable. People that are paying for this in the political realm will hire these people, and then those big people didn't have the skills or abilities to pull off the job. How do you fix that? Well,
I think she tried to fix it by, now I'm not saying it was the right thing to do, but I think she tried to fix it by having assistants in the room who were Spanish.
Right.
However, there was no communication between the teachers and assistants.
There you go.
If we go back to previous cases, I don't remember what case it was, but it talked about how we were evaluating something, and it said that the boards are selected based on their prestige, and people will donate based on that.
Yeah.
So I don't have this be any different. I think what Olivia's problem was that she was doing it fast, and she didn't have the relationship between the assistants and the teachers.
Right.
Communication. How would they communicate in the classroom? What their roles would be?
Yes.
As part of it was part of the problem.
Yeah. She felt compelled to hire some people that looked a certain way to satisfy donors. And she understood that. And so to that end, she hired some people to help them that actually had the skills and abilities that would be needed in that classroom. Unfortunately, she didn't do any kind of matching or training with those. And as somebody who has supervised, one of my earliest jobs in leadership was managing teachers and teacher assistants. One of the things that you find out is pairing them and getting them to understand their roles is not as easy as handing them a pamphlet or a sheet of paper and say, here. What you do as an elementary principal, especially back when I was in it a long time ago, before we started into accountability, was getting them to understand what their roles were and getting them to get along. Teacher assistants thought that, it was just about daycare in the primary grades, and teachers were being put under pressure even back then as we were moving into accountability to have results. And so there was conflict. Teachers being held accountable for results, teacher assistants, all that stuff doesn't matter. And so the notion that you can just put a teacher and assistant together in a room and everything's going to be good and everybody will know their role and everybody will stay in their lane, that's a pipe dream. I had hair when I became an elementary principal. 5 years later, I was slick bald, and it was over teachers and teacher assistants. So again, I said, this one's kind of personal. I understand that she was hiring people based on need, and her need was not for them to be good in the classroom. Her need was them to look a certain way and represent a certain community so that she could continue to get donations. That's okay. Sometimes you have to do those things. But then the work would be to work with them to define their role and to get them to work together. And she did not do that. And so these questions should lead to this conclusion. We can all see that. But but what your job, your primary responsibility here is getting Olivia to see that.
Yes.
That you cannot just throw people together and it's all going to work out.
Right.
Here, go do this. This notion that of old-time transactional leadership, we'll just hire good people and they'll figure it out and we'll just leave them alone. That does not work in modern times. They will not work it out. They will not get along.
No.
We have become very tribal. As I'm sad to say that we're going back to that more so than ever I've seen in my career. We're becoming very tribal. If you're not part of my tribe, I'm not working with you. And that's going to be going forward. That's going to be very difficult. But that is going to be your issue here is design data collection methodology that shows Olivia if you're going to hire people for one reason and hold them accountable for another, you're going to have to do a lot more staff development and training. And you're going to have to get everybody on board. You're going to, everybody's going to have to understand that they have the same goals. And so I think your questions elicit that information. I think that's excellent. Overall, what do you think about today's activities? I'm so pleased that we had 3 different ones today. What do you think about today's activities? You can unmute. Let me unmute you. Let me see. Let me go back to participants. Me, reclaim host.
Yeah, let me stop.
Okay, here we go. And so I get everybody's picture on the screen. Ooh, that's like when Dr. Hamilton's picture pops up. Scares me every time. What do you think? Do you understand qualitative data collection now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was the point of this weekend's adventure, this case study, was to get you to understand the practicality, not just the theoretical concepts of data collection for qualitative measures, but to understand the practical concepts of that. That's why I said I'm very pleased that we had 3 different cases that brought out 3 different aspects. But remember, we cannot escape reliability and validity, even in qualitative work. It starts with our integrity, making sure that we design those elements in it, and that we use good technique, good methodology, that we're realistic, 10 to 15% of the population, that we don't do more than 3 interviews a day, that if we're using multiple interviewers, that we use inter-rater reliability, that our questions are designed to be valid, that they actually measure what we want to be measured. All of those things factor into qualitative data collection and analysis. And so hopefully as you go forward in your consultancy, you will be able to utilize some of these techniques and some of the things you learned in this so that you at least will feel better about the data that you collect and that you will be realistic in the scope of your data collection endeavors. That, for me, that may be the most important thing, is that now that you understand the depths, to the uninitiated, qualitative data collection analysis looks pretty simple and pretty easy. my goal here was to make sure you understand it is not. So when you hear me say I'm not really a qualitative person, what I mean is you got to really dig in. This has got to be your specialty. It's a lot deeper. For me on my side, it's easier. I'll be first as long as you can understand the calculus. Quantitative data collection and analysis is much easier, in my opinion. It's much quicker and more direct. But you got to understand the calculus. On this side, much harder, much deeper, much more time consuming, more difficult. I don't have the patience to do this on a regular basis. Dr. Hamilton is a much more patient person than I am. Remember, I'm an operations guy. Let's go get it done. Let's move on. We got something else to do. My catchphrase is always, and hurry. Let's go do this and hurry. We got something else that we can do down the line. That is not the personality type that lends itself to the best qualitative work. I understand that. I can do it, but it is not my Dr. Hamilton is much more reflective, introspective, goes slower. He's more of a curriculum person. He was an English teacher. Take one wild guess as to what I taught in school, in high school, a million years ago.
Math.
I taught physics and chemistry.
Oh, physics. So that's even worse.
That's my point. And so you understand, I'm about physical and mathematical sciences. Let's get it. Let's go. We got things that we can do. That's the difference in our personality traits. Those traits carry over to data collection as well. And you have to understand, you have to be self-reflective. Like in Joe Harry's window, you have to be able to see yourself and know what you're good at and what your particular area or bent is. And so for me, I do data qualitative work, but I have to fight my natural tendency. Let's just get this done and move on. That is not the tack that you can take with qualitative. It is with quantitative. It's about moving on, running the numbers, going fast. But qualitative is much more introspective, much more reflective. But there are rules in the practice that you must follow. It takes much longer, much harder. The analysis is much more difficult. So you can substitute one hard work versus being able to do math. I prefer to do the math. You need to find what you're good at, though, and then hire appropriately as a leader of the organization. If you're not good at the quantitative stuff, you need to hire people. You need to know just enough to be able to supervise them. And that's the point of the questions in the discussion board on quantitative is these questions. If you know the answers to these, then you can supervise the quant. So if you are the quant, then you need to be able to hire people who can do the qualitative stuff, who have a different personality type than you. As the leader of an organization, you can't just hire people that look and sound like you. Yeah. It can't just be an echo chamber. You have to fill in the gaps on what is not your strong suit. Even though you might work at it and be good at it, it's not your natural inclination. You need to understand that. It will very much color your data collection processes. Your own personal bent will do that. And you must know that. Again, you got to know thyself. Again, it goes back to integrity. You got to know this is not how I like to do what I like to do or what I'm good at. And so you always hear me say, I'm not a qualitative person. I acknowledge that up front. And that's important for me to keep that in my mind. That means I'm not going to work at it. It means that I need. Tracy's got to leave us at 11:30. Yeah. We're wrapping up here. So I think that was her idea to tell me to hush. I'm coming to the benediction
I was just
here.
saying that I have to leave, so I didn't want to interrupt.
No, I'm through here. It's just I want you to understand going forward as a leader. Remember, I'm training you to be a leader here. As a leader, you've got to be self-aware. You've got to be self-aware and know who you are as that leader, and then hire and supervise appropriately to make sure that that your organization is is sound and diverse. All right, questions, issues, problems? Okay, Lisa says she's starving. All right. That was my wife calling. That was the gong that sounded a minute ago. Said,
So you have 3
Let's
women
be
telling you to let's go.
Quantitative. Come on, we got stuff to do.
leave these people alone. All right, we're done.
Bye.
I will see you in 2 weeks.
Yep.
All right.
All right, everybody have a good day.
Thank you.